Here in part 6, let's talk about multicellularity and complexity and how they're associated with increased atmospheric CO2 concentrations. I'm trying to drive home the point in these lectures that changes in atmospheric CO2, changes in atmospheric oxygen have driven a lot of the evolutionary and biological diversity changes that we see on our planet. So multicellularity first spread through the oceans and then later on land as oxygen increased. So initially we have the rusting of the planet, and then we have an increase in oxygen levels. And at some point along here and some point along here, we're going to see changes in the kinds of organism and the sizes of organisms on the planet. With that change in mitochondria in the eukaryote, we have a mechanism to generate lots of energy. But as these organisms increase in size and complexity, we need to have the evolution of transport systems that can transport resources that would have been exterior to the cell to those interior cells. So going back to our old friend, the graph, we have the decrease in CO2 concentrations associated with cyanobacteria and the great oxidation event, snowball Earth. We come out of snowball Earth and we find the emergence of eukaryotes. And over time, as oxygen levels increase, we find the emergence of simple multicellular organisms. And then about 650 million years ago, we come out of snowball Earth 2, and we see another increase in oxygen levels, and we find the emergence of complex multicellular organisms. Paleobiologists consistently see these trends, that after snowball Earth 1, when we have the increase in oxygen concentration, we find the evolution of eukaryotes. When oxygen levels got to a certain threshold value, we find simple multicellular organisms. And when oxygen levels got to even higher levels, we find the evolution of complex multicellular organisms. And when oxygen levels got to their highest levels ever, we find the largest organisms, the largest animal systems that ever existed on our planet. We'll be talking about that in a future lecture. So the emergence of complex multicellular organisms allows for increases in body size by allowing for differentiation in function. Now, so is this transition to multicellularity a big leap? Is it as rare as the acquisition of mitochondria? Is it as rare as the evolution of oxygenic photosynthesis? The answer turns out to be no. Multicellularity has evolved at least 25 times in the eukaryotes. Lots of plant groups, amoebas, and others are enriched with multicellularity. So it is not a unique event. So what are some of the features that are derived from multicellularity? Increased longevity is an obvious one. Non-reproductive or somatic cells can die, and they can be replaced without killing the organism. With multicellularity, we can have an increase in size. That means we can have an escape from predation, or an organism could be even more predatory. And we find the evolution of novel features with multicellularity. Mobility, the ability to crawl, the ability to walk, the ability to fly. We find the evolution of cellular level immunity systems, communication through nervous systems, structure through skeletal systems, and morphological defense, whether it's the armor on a stegosaurus or the shell of a clam. And probably most interesting to me is we find the isolation and protection of the germline DNA You know them in the form of sperm and egg. But there are trade-offs and costs that are associated with multicellularity. There's a requirement for internal resource delivery. Need a transport system. New features and structures are required that were not required in unicellular organisms. So at this point in class, we would break into a group discussion to talk further about this topic. So let's go back to the multicellularity and describe that there are some key features for both simple and complex multicellular systems. You need a protein or some way for cells to adhere to each other. You need a way for these cells to be able to communicate with one another. You need some way of gene regulation to coordinate growth and differentiation. Not every cell can become a brain cell or a liver cell or a muscle cell. So how is that differentiation controlled? And of course, you then need a transport system. A transport system to bring resources to different parts of this complex multicellular organism. So in humans, this transport system is associated with a circulatory system. Plants don't have a circulatory system, but they're equally complex. They have vascular tissues. Some transport water and nutrients up, and others transport nutrients and other materials downward. So rather than a circulatory system, they have a bidirectional vascular system. Different ways of solving the same issue are bringing resources from one part of the organism to the next. There's another feature that we see when we begin to look at eukaryotes, and that is that the life cycle becomes more complex. With the evolution of the eukaryotes, we often find that we have a free-living or haploid cell and another often free-living cell type, which is the diploid form, 1 versus 2N. Well, that'll be the topic when we talk about plants invading land, angiosperms, and gymnosperms. So the best way to prepare for an exam is to, of course, understand what I've presented as the key points. All of the exams are based on your ability to talk about the key points. Here, I've listed the key points from today's lecture.